abused, there are other officers there, they will now have the duty to intervene. Okay, this is statewide policy that officers must be trained on. They must be trained on de-escalation techniques. They must be trained on banning chokeholds. The only caveat is if they are under the threat of death. Now, I tried to remove that provision. That was something that my colleagues on the right would not go for. But to think now that it's statewide policy that officers have to be trained on banning chokeholds only if they are under threat of death, I think is a step forward. All data now has to be reported on any police shootings from every police unit in the state to FDLE, our statewide policing agency. There has to be an independent review when there is a police shooting, not a review internally by that police unit, but a review outside of the police unit by another agency. There's use of force training. There's the Kaya Roll Act. I had that bill a couple years ago. Kaya Roll was a young girl, 6 years old, that was arrested. That was put in place. Now, no child under 7 can be arrested in this state. So, I say all that to say we did have some successes. I was glad to sponsor that bill, and I'll leave it there.
Well, and thank you for the hard work. I think the George Floyd incident and how it impacted America, it really is enlightening to know that we were also having those conversations legislatively here in the state of Florida. However, I'm just curious, there is a lot of crime still happening in the community as a result of guns. Every day you're hearing more and more about the guns. Is there anything or any discussions being held about gun violence, and how do we get a handle on that in terms of our communities?
The only conversation that's being had in Tallahassee with guns is expanding the use and the privileges of guns with permitless. Folks don't have to even have a permit to even carry. Open carry. Those are the only conversations Tallahassee wants to have. With us being just in the minority, many of the bills, Representative Smith, typically each year files bills. There are tons of bills that Democrats file to provide additional safety or gun safety. But none of those for years have never seen the light of day. And so, Tallahassee just does not have the appetite for that. It is, again, trying to put in less restrictions on guns, which increases gun violence.
And you can now take your gun to church.
Right, I saw that.
Even a church that is connected to a school. In this last session, there was a law that allows people to take guns to church. So the expansion, as Representative Brown has identified, is what the majority in Tallahassee are focused on. We did have some successes, as I mentioned, with the bill that Senator Bracy talked about. I had a standalone bill that was rolled into that larger bill, and my standalone bill would create the database that he talked about. And the database would record, through the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, instances of excessive force. The police officer from Minnesota, Derek Chauvin, who knelt on George Floyd's neck for almost 10 minutes, has a second home in my district here in Windermere. And in Minnesota, he had 15 complaints of excessive force. If you had a database that captured that information, that would have raised, or should have raised, a red flag with someone that this is a person who doesn't have the temperament, the personality, the training to be in law enforcement. And then without a database, we have people who are terminated as law enforcement officers who leave, let's say, Orange County and go to Broward County and become law enforcement officers. The database will help to prevent that as well, and that was a success that was rolled into the larger bill. And we also had Gale's Law, which dealt with rape kits and making sure that they are tested and that the results come in a timely manner. Gail Gardner from here in Orange County had an incident over 30 years ago, and there was a rape kit that just sat on the shelf. And when they finally got back to the rape kit, they found that this was a serial rapist who in fact was in prison for what he had done to someone else, and had the kit been tested earlier, perhaps it would have stopped him from abusing other people. So we had some successes, but some disappointments as well.
Thank you.
Briefly, I also had a standalone bill that was rolled into the larger criminal justice reform, and it was dealing with minimum qualifications for law enforcement officers and correctional officers, because in the state of Florida, we have 67 counties, and it's not a uniform policy, threshold, standard floor for applicants to be law enforcement officers, say in Orange County versus Lee County or Bay County. So I'm happy to see that standalone bill was a part of the larger criminal justice reform bill, because it will set a standard that no matter where you are in the state of Florida, if you encounter these individuals that are hired and go through the process of being trained, then they should all be meeting the same minimum qualifications and standards.
And let me just add that the NRA has so much power and influence in Tallahassee that there will never be any restrictions on guns as long as the party is in power, that's in power now, because of the influence that they have. It will never happen. And so that's the reality. There will only be expansion of more guns.
That's a very real statement for a lot of topics, because people need to know why it's so important that we consistently tell you to come out here and vote every year. We can come back here next year and do another legislative update with the same results or lack thereof, but until we really change the people who are in power and control, we're gonna get the same results.
Just knowing that we're expanding, up in Tallahassee, we're expanding gun rights and giving more people access to guns, coupled with what's happening in our communities in terms of this violence, and then you tag on this hostility about, or this question about which life matters most. It does ping a lot of questions about whether or not we can feel safe sometimes in our neighborhoods. Because there's a lot of young people dying at the hands of a gun, and so a lot of that appears to be overlooked. But then you see this expansion of giving people the right to carry in church.
Yeah. Well, and let me say, I support the Second Amendment rights, but lawful. It has to be lawful. I mean, there's a shutdown of any conversation on any kind of background checks to see who's buying guns. I mean, there's no balance when it comes to supporting Second Amendment rights. I mean, I think I'm pretty level-headed on that, but there's no conversation on any kind of checks and balances when it comes to that.
I do know that Senator Chevron Jones had a bill to look at gun violence in urban areas, because sometimes we focus on the mass shootings where multiple people are killed, but people are killed, just as you say, every day in the inner city. So he did promote and advocate for looking at gun violence in urban settings and not waiting until it's 9 people at Mother Emanuel in Charlotte, South Carolina, for example. But what about the single person? And we had an incident not long ago where a young woman is standing outside of Wawa and is killed. Teenager. So we do have to look at gun violence in urban areas.
We're going to move on to healthcare, and we know that you took that one and ran with it, Representative Brown. So let's talk a little bit about healthcare.
I did, and you know, just to kind of continue on what many of my colleagues talked about as far as just a distraction that we had in Tallahassee with so many bad bills that we really can't get a lot of the good stuff that we need to do, get it done. And so we started off with an abortions bill. Each year there is an abortions bill, but this particular bill dealt with disability abortions. Abortions that to me should be between that mom, that dad, and their doctor. Well, this time it's between the legislature and that doctor. And so there was a bill which fortunately died in committee, but it would make it a third-degree felony for a doctor to perform an abortion on a disabled fetus. There was bills relating to just regulation of marijuana, as it was mentioned earlier. We have legalized here in the state of Florida medical marijuana. Well, we had the legislature, those in leadership, wanting to focus on minimizing those dosage, but also putting a cap on the potency of that medical marijuana. There was a lot of outcry, and many of the patients that have benefited from medical marijuana came out to again rally against this particular bill, and fortunately that bill died. Another bill, some of the bills that passed that we're grateful, and kind of just also piggybacking on, again, a lot of the news, a lot of the issues that happened within our own community that made the news, but also passed, that I guess sparked statewide attention, and also passage of a law which deals with child care facilities. We know years ago within the Pine Hills community, or just the past couple summers, we continue to hear about child deaths when they are in the hands of child care facilities. Many of them are left in vans, left in cars. And so this year, I believe it was the third time this bill actually went to Tallahassee, but this year we passed a requirement for many of our for our child care facilities to put in an alarm in those vehicles that are transporting our children. And so we were very happy to see finally that bill pass, but also be signed just a few weeks ago by the governor. Some of the bills that I worked on were, again, bills that sort of impacted not only my community, not only me personally, but also statewide. One bill in particular deals with maternal health. It was in the beginning of our organizational session. Our speaker mentioned he wanted to do something to deal with the Black maternal health care crisis. As we've heard, Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die while giving birth. And it's 66% of those times, 66% of the times, many of those are preventable deaths. And so our moms are not going home with our babies. This past year, I became a first-time mom, but also pregnant during COVID. And so it hit a little different for me. This particular issue is something since my freshman year I've been working on due to many of the folks that are friends, that are family that have died while giving childbirth or after giving childbirth. But this year, as she mentioned, I put a little more passion behind it. And so this year I sponsored a bill that would expand Medicaid for our moms. Right now, the state offered, well, now it's different. The state before offered only 60 days of additional Medicaid care or additional health care. The bill that got passed offers now 12 months of postpartum Medicaid care. This bill was something that kind of grabbed everyone's attention. Again, not only Black moms, but many of our moms, many of them who don't even have health care. This is something we have continued to ask for year in, which is to expand Medicaid for many of our people here in the state. So this was just a piece of what we were able to do in relations to that, the benefit of access to health care. Another bill, which is a pilot program that will be done here within Orange County, but also Duval County, is a bill that would establish a telehealth appointments. I had heard that many of the healthcare facilities had shut down during COVID. And so they were unable to offer telehealth appointments to many of our pregnant women. And if we're really looking at, again, improving access, but also improving outcomes, we still need to provide the health care for our moms and also our babies. And so this particular bill was able to be passed. There was funding that we were able to get from the state and also from the federal government to establish a telehealth program, but also work synonymously with Healthy Start families. Healthy Start will be working to, and we're looking to also add in our spectrums and our data folks, our AT&Ts, to also be a part of this pilot program and partnership. But what this telehealth bill will do is provide the necessary tools for many of these moms who are not going to their doctor's appointments, the incentives they need to make sure they make their doctor's appointments. Whether it's transportation, whether it's a cell phone, whether it's a blood pressure kit, a scale, whatever it is that that mom needs to make sure she is healthy. And even the education surrounding taking care of yourself, but also being able to take care of your children. Other resources that we have available, such as WIC, such as assistance with daycare or child care for many of our moms. And so I was very happy to see that bill did not have to come back year after year, but that is something that not only we're excited about, the Healthy Start families is excited about, but surprisingly, the Department of Health and the Office of Minority Health is also happy about the passage of this particular bill. Another bill I dealt with, which is the Office of Minority Health. The Office of Minority Health sits up under the State Department of Health. And they are responsible for looking at many of the health disparities that are happening within all of our minority communities. Not only are they supposed to be looking, but they're supposed to help put in tools or resources to provide prevention of these disparities. And so this particular office has been in existence for 20 years, but they've only received $1 million, sometimes $3 million, years past even 11 million, to pass out resources within our counties. Well, this year, a bill was passed to actually put additional statutory requirements and footing within the Office of Minority Health, with making them more accountable. So it was $9 million budget allocation that was put there for them to, again, provide the resources, for them to actually collect data, which they weren't necessarily collecting from many of these minority communities. They're also required to put this on their website, put this information within their pamphlets, but also the resources that we have at the state that's actually just sitting there for many of our local communities to use. They're actually supposed to be bringing that down to our counties. So we also added, which I received a call today from the person who will be our minority health liaison for Orange County to do a meet and greet. But we will have in each of the 67 counties a minority health liaison that will be boots on the ground to work within our communities to make sure we are making improvements within healthcare, but also the resources that we have in Tallahassee, they're getting down to our community level.
So just really quickly, and to kind of tie Representative Thompson into this discussion, because you mentioned in your intro that you chaired a new committee, or you were part of a new committee, Pandemic Public Emergencies. And so we know right now COVID it's not over.
No.
Right? We keep hearing about this variant that is attacking communities at an alarming rate. However, many of us have been vaccinated. I have, that's why I have a mask on. And we do know that, you know, the gentleman who is leading our state and has been elected as our governor versus, you know, our president, they're on two different wavelengths when it comes to securing communities and making sure everyone is safe. So as we go into a new legislative session, or even the one we just left, how is that? Because we keep hearing a lot of, or seeing a lot of press releases saying, you know, everything's open. Come to Florida right now, we're open.
Well, our governor has been more focused on the economy than on the safety and the health of Floridians. The cruise industry, for example, wanted people who came on their vessels to show proof that they had been vaccinated. And that was something that the CDC had recommended, and the governor was opposed to that. So I think we have to police ourselves. Just because the cruise ship goes doesn't mean you have to go on it. So we have got to take some personal responsibility, but the emphasis has been on the economy and making sure that everything is open and that businesses did not suffer. And I think we have lost a lot of lives, people who died needlessly because we did not follow CDC guidelines. And even in terms of schools, when students go back to school in the fall, masks are going to be optional. They don't have to wear masks. And so there are some people who think that wearing a mask is a sign of weakness, rather than saying this is a way to stop the spread of COVID-19, and not only to protect yourself, but to protect your neighbor, to have some compassion for other people. But that's what you're seeing in terms of the different approaches. One focuses on the economy rather than on healthcare.
So, and maybe I might be, because I have a teenager, so I did get him vaccinated week 1. But has vaccinations opened up for children of any age?
12
It's
and up.
still 12 and up.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah,
Yes.
and so
Right.
I know I am asking, I won't say we, I am asking for folks to get vaccinated. There is a second variant that is out, and I think we have to really get serious about getting vaccinated, but also many of our students will be going back to schools, or our babies will be going up to college. We want to make sure they are safe and they are doing the right thing and protecting themselves, but also being able to protect others. And I think it's important that we as a community get serious about it and get folks vaccinated. There are vaccine sites throughout our community, so let's use them.
So are we eliminating the whole of trying to seek out whether or not all children who are school age should be vaccinated, since everyone's going back to school in the fall?
The vaccines have been made available, and the parents will have to make a decision in terms of whether or not they want their children vaccinated. Serving on pandemics and public emergencies, one of our very first meetings, we got statistics on testing and vaccines. And I could see just from the zip codes of where people were getting access that a lot of our communities were being left out. And so I raised a concern. And in response to that concern, vaccines were made available through some of the black churches. And people could go to the church through a drive-through system and get the vaccine. But you have to be able to speak up and to make sure that you're looking at all segments of the community. When the vaccines were initially made available, they were going to be given through Publix supermarkets, through the Publix pharmacies. When have you seen a public supermarket in a low-income community? So that shows a disparity right there. So you had to push to say, let's not leave any community behind, because as I said, if you have pockets of the population, people who are not being vaccinated, then it puts at risk those who are.
Okay, we're gonna move on to our next subject, workforce and jobs. Representative McCurdy.
Sure. There was a bill dealing with workforce education. I served on the Education and Employment Committee. It was the first year that they merged those two topics into one committee, so happy to be a part of that inaugural committee. But there were several reforms geared at a system-wide streamlined approach to improve the state's evolving workforce and economic needs. So a few things that came out of this one package bill were there'll be some work-based opportunities for individuals in the state of Florida. Students can now earn digital credentials, which will be beneficial for them. You know, we're in a technological era. We're in a new age. Things are, there's a digital age now, so earning these digital credentials can will help them be more attractive in the in the employment field and the employment when they're out searching for work. Something that was that stood out to me in this bill, HB 1507. If anybody's taking notes and want to go and read it in its entirety, but it creates a money-back guarantee program also. And this program is designed to refund tuition to graduates that don't find employment. So, you know, a lot of times you hear about the cost of school. Everybody doesn't get a scholarship. A lot of people pay out of pocket, and you go to school for 2 years for AA or for 4 years for a bachelor's, and you expect to be hired in your respective field that you studied in, right? And that doesn't always happen. And this program would, and I don't want y'all calling our offices now because we passed the bill, but this burden lies on, now it's up to the school boards and state college system to now implement what we passed as a legislature. So although we were in the minority, this is something that's very important. I mentioned earlier how there were scholarships that they were changing the criteria, which would make it, which would create a different threshold as far as what these students are eligible to get from these scholarships. So now, with their financial burden, and folks who don't get scholarships or don't get full rides, if you don't get a job, you should be able to, because it's hard to live, cost of living, housing is an issue. So any money that can go back into people's pockets, sign me up. I'll vote for those bills all year, and I look forward to things that we can do to expand upon that when we talk about workforce and education jointly.
Okay.
Rep. Brown was going to say something.
Oh, I just wanted to kind of just add something relating to just some other bills that dealt with workforce. I know we have seen what has happened with the system, the unemployment system. And there was a bill to require DEO to fix, come up with a whole brand new system that is efficient for our state. But then there was also, and that bill passed, there were bills to increase the amount of money, the benefits that many of our constituents would receive. That bill unfortunately failed, and that was one that was filed, but will possibly be brought back next year. And if I could just, as it relates to, because I see a lot of local government people in here, hi. This septic to sewer issue. I do not have the information with me, but please follow up with my office. There was a pot of money that was put up under DEP to assist our local governments with the septic to sewer issue. They do not have enough applicants. And so I would love to follow up that conversation with our local officials as to how we work to work that to our benefit. To get our folks, get our folks, since we are here in the west side in a priority area. So just wanted to put that.
I think many people don't understand, as large as Pine Hills is, much of it is still on septic.
And I see officials here from Oakland, and I was able to get $500,000 in the budget this year to move Oakland from septic to sewer. But if there are additional dollars that have not been tapped into, you need to follow up on that. That just pushes you ahead a little bit further,
right.
faster.
And the septic to sewer retrofit program, I think people don't realize how much it goes into the value of the entire neighborhood and entire community. To be able to say that the area is on sewer, I think people are looking at it from an individual perspective as to whether or not sewer is more costly than septic and not an environmental, or even just the way the community looks and thrives. You can't really invite jobs, and that's the reason why I would tie that into jobs. You can't invite jobs or new businesses into the area if you don't have the infrastructure to support it.
That's true.
We thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Yes.
So-
Tomorrow, we're gonna have a ribbon cutting, for 50 residents who will have.
Septic to sewer.
Fantastic.
So what we're gonna do now, and just really quick, because I always bring this matter up. People call me all the time saying, I'm looking for a job, I'm looking for a job, I'm looking for a job. And I say, well, it's a lot of people hiring. I can certainly link you to some opportunities. And then they talk about their background, right? And the whole, I have to check the box. Is there anything that we're doing to tie criminal justice, criminal background and jobs at the state level?
I'm sorry, wait, I missed that. Say that again.
To
Tie.
link people who have backgrounds
Mhm.
and they have re-entered the society and now they're looking for employment, housing. Some of
thought
those
we had
things,
Panda
those
Box.
barriers that exist.
Yeah.
Do you have something?
Yeah, so, there were a couple, bills that were filed. One would, that Representative Morales, is that her name? Daisy Morales, she filed, which allowed barbers to work mobily.
Yes.
And so that is one bill. There was another bill by Representative Chambliss, that died, which would kind of reduce some of the regulation for many of those that are re-entering back into our society, for many of our licensed jobs. So there's always been a chip at that. We each year do a dereg bill, but there's still more work to do. So it's just the best is yet to come on that. And then I know that there's always the box check
the box.
issue that somebody sponsors each year. I do know it's Senator Powell. I'm not sure who is always the House sponsor, but Senator Powell over in the Senate usually sponsors a bill to help with removing that box on many of the state applications.
Okay, so now we're gonna talk about voting and elections. Good, touchy subject, right? Because we're watching what's happening across the nation. I mean, the fact that the Democratic delegation of the state of Texas literally got on a jet and went to DC to evade some of this legislation that is being passed. And we know that the state of Florida, there's some discussions being held in Tallahassee. Let's hear about it.
Well, when I talk about backlash, that is one of the biggest examples of backlash. The backlash involved making sure that there was no widespread voter fraud. There was no widespread voter fraud. So why are we enacting a bill to address something that has not happened? All 67 of our supervisors of elections opposed this bill, Senate Bill 90, but it passed anyway. The bill is going to limit the use of drop boxes. At one time, we had drop boxes available 24/7 with surveillance cameras to make sure no one tampered with them. Now the drop boxes will be available only when the supervisor of elections office is open or during early voting. So if you work from 9 to 5 and the supervisor's office closes at 5, you are going to have limited access to the drop boxes. Now, why? You have to think, well, what prompted this? Well, Republicans have used vote-by-mail ballots extensively and in greater numbers than Democrats. That changed in 2020. So now we've got to do something about these drop boxes. We've got to make sure that there is no quote unquote ballot harvesting, meaning that if you have a friend down the street who's 90 years old, lives independently, but doesn't drive, and that friend asks you to take that ballot back to the supervisor of elections office, you can only have 2 ballots in your possession, one being yours. So third-party groups, nonprofits that used to help people get their ballots returned are now going to be hampered. You can take the vote by mail ballot to the post office, no problem. But if you take it to the supervisors of elections office, there they want you to have ID and all of that. Why are you treating the ballot differently than you would if it were at the post office? The supervisors of elections were congratulated for having one of the smoothest, one of the best elections in Florida ever. And this is how we repay them. This is how we acknowledge what they did in 2020. So you come up with all of these things to limit access to drop boxes. There are now going to be more requirements in terms of signature matches. When you use your vote by mail ballot, you're required to sign on the outside of the envelope. And that signature is going to be compared to the signature that you used when you originally registered to vote. And let's say that's 20 years ago. And in 20 years, your hand isn't as steady as it used to be, or you have arthritis or something, and so someone looks at those two and can discard your ballot because a determination is made or could be made that the signatures do not match. So I'm encouraging everyone to update your signatures so that you don't have that problem. So those are some of the issues with SB 90. None of the supervisors asked for that bill. None of them supported that bill. The bill also prohibits outside funds. You can't accept outside funds to increase voter access, to educate voters. And you have to remember that LeBron James provided money for people who wanted to know if they had fines and fees. Mike Zuckerberg provided money. So they're saying now the supervisors of elections cannot accept any outside funds. And one of the things that was most offensive, and I said so on the floor, we have laws here in Florida that say if you have an animal outside for prolonged periods of time, you must provide the animal food and water. In this bill, you cannot provide food and water to people who are standing in line waiting to vote. So we treat voters worse than we would treat a dog. Why in the world would you put something like that into law? And it's just to create additional barriers for people who are trying to vote. And voting is the bedrock of our democracy, and I think we should be making it easier for people to participate in our democracy and not making it more difficult.
Can I just add to that? I just want to reiterate what she said. Every single supervisor of elections officer in the state, in the panhandle, in the most reddest areas, all of them said this is bad policy, and they all were against it. And the head of the supervisor of elections officer who represents Ocoee County said in committee that this will limit vote by mail in Democratic counties. Clearly, even the Republican officials said this is what this is designed to do. And they jammed it down our throats because they had to vote. And this is in direct response to Donald Trump losing. That's what this is, and I hate to be partisan, but that's exactly what this is. It happened in Georgia, it happened in Florida, and these same laws went across the state. So that's what it is.
So in preparation for removing our current governor from his seat, or even just our next election, how would we encourage people to really and truly go beyond the barriers that Senate Bill 90 creates to make sure that their vote counts? Because we have people who, even nurses, we have people who, it was already a huge issue to get them to the ballot box.
Well, I'm recommending that you take the people to the supervisors of elections office to drop off their ballot. We can work around these kinds of things. So if you can't take the ballot, take the people. If you have a church bus or a van, take the people. We have some nonprofits who are going to donate pizza and water and to the supervisor's office, and the supervisor's staff can then give the food and the water to people who are waiting in line to vote. So we just have to be creative
And also,
and figure out how to work around.
and also just a plug here, you know, my suggestion would be for all of our groups, all of our churches, organizations, friends, families to get educated on these new laws. For one, HB1, but also this elections bills. There is a Equal Ground, which is a voter education organization, or I wouldn't even say it's a voter education because they kind of educate on all issues, but I believe they have representatives here. If you all would raise your hand for folks who want to get educated on this bill, because you know, we're not even going into everything that this bill says and does, but in order for us to maneuver, I think it's important that we utilize organizations that are trained to provide the information, utilize them, and I'm sure they'll be happy to give you the information. I think Kristen Wiley she stood up in the back, raised her hand. Allison is over here also, and you all can get with them after this meeting to get coordinated.
And update your signature, please.
Update your signature, update your address. And where do you do that?
You can do it when you go for your driver's license to renew your tag, and certainly you can do it at the supervisors of elections office.
So each year that you are renewing your car registration, and then when you're renewing your driver's license, you can request the paperwork to also update
Yes.
your voter registration information. Okay? So I think I heard you say that some of the funding is also being prohibited from going, so is that just directly to the supervisor? Nonprofits will still, and churches alike, will still be able to do some of the programmatic efforts to get people to the ballot box to cast their vote. That's not going away.
No, nonprofits can still, if you're in voter empowerment and making sure that people have access to the polls, you can still do the work that you're doing. But you can't the supervisors of elections cannot accept outside funds.
Not only that, I asked in committee the question, were we gonna give more money to the supervisor of elections to inform their citizenry about the changes?
Right.
And they said no. And so there's so many little changes in this bill, and they are purposely trying to hide those changes from the people so that they won't be informed. So it's incumbent upon us to talk about this, because we're gonna need the same kind of turnout, probably even higher, in the upcoming elections in 2022. We have some serious consequences in who we elect in these next elections, and so it's important that we talk about it. This dialogue right here is important, so that you can tell the people you know. Yeah.
Well, we have a few questions. Before we get to district priorities, and each one of you all can tell us exactly what you're getting ready to work on as you get prepared to kick off for committee week in September, right? Mm-hmm. And so, prior to that, let's address some of these questions. All right, my sister. Please discuss your accomplishments and continued commitment to arts and culture initiatives and funding.
I'm the founder of the Wells-Built Museum of African American History and Culture in Paramore. It was a former hotel that was listed in the Negro Motorist Green Book, and people used the Green Book to find their way when they were coming through this area during segregation, to find where they would be welcome and where they would be safe. So I have long been committed. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary, by the way. So I have long been committed to culture and art and history, and I'm continuing to work on that and to make sure Florida is one of the few southern states that does not have a civil rights museum.
And I'm the legend.
Think about that. And I've been pushing to say we need, Jackson, Mississippi, if you remember, not too many years ago, opened a state civil rights museum, and President Donald Trump, in fact, cut the ribbon for the grand opening. Now that caused the NAACP to boycott, but they have a state civil rights museum. In Greensboro, North Carolina, where they had the first sit-ins, they have a civil rights museum. I visited the Underground Railroad Museum in Cincinnati, right across the Ohio River. So I've long been committed to that, and think that I think Florida needs to come to be on par with so many other states in terms of acknowledging all of our history. I think part of what we're seeing here is this denial to say that these things didn't happen, but they did. And so I will continue to push for arts and culture and for funding to support those.
Yeah, let me talk about, I think that's a great segue to talk about the African American Cultural Historical Grants. We had unprecedented funding, and I was privileged enough to be able to write the criteria for African American museums that can apply for these grants throughout the state, where if they want to start a museum, or if they want to rehabilitate an existing museum, that's what this funds will be used for. And it goes up. The cap is $500,000. If an entity can find a matching grant, they can get up to $1 million. Myself and the Senate President, the Senate President gave me the opportunity to write that. And so, and I actually collaborated with my sister, LaVon Bracy Davis, who is the chair of the committee that will be ranking all of these grants, and so throughout the state. And so I think this is an unprecedented opportunity to highlight African American museums across the state.
And we've seen a great deal of African Americans, young and old, who are coming out and you know, as members of the Guild and as executive producers, and you know, we have people here who kind of come to our area thinking that they could get ahead because we have Disney and Universal, who are interested in screenwriting, right? Who are interested in those big jobs behind the scenes, behind the cameras. Can we utilize those funds for that?
No, they're specifically for African American museum structures. This is facilities. Many of our structures that are existing are old, dilapidated, and they need funding. And next year, I've already talked about it with leadership about coming back for programming dollars, to just have different programming specifically dedicated for African American programming. But I think that's a good point, and to say that we used to have tax credits for the entertainment industry, and I think it brought so much business to the state, specifically Central Florida. And all of that business went to Atlanta, Louisiana, once we got rid of it. And it was such a good investment. And that's something I continue to fight for, because I think it boosts our entertainment industry, specifically in Central Florida.
Okay, so we have another question here. Kudos to you, Senator Bracy, because having an FDLE database to track officers was a much-needed system. Has a reprimand system been put in place that will remove officers from their police departments when excessive complaints have been documented? Ultimately, what will be done with the information collected?
Well, I'll ask Senator Thompson to talk on this too, because this was the portion that she put in there. But no, there's not an accountability measure, and that's something that I fought for, but my colleagues on the right side of the aisle would not go that far to put in those accountability measures if these policies are violated. And so that's something that we'll have to continue to work on in the next session. And that's why I've always said that this is a good first step, but this is not an end-all be-all. We still have a lot further to go.
And things happen incrementally in Tallahassee. You may not get it done the first year or even the second or third year, but you continue to kind of chip away until you get where you want to go. And so the database is the beginning so that we can at least see where the hot spots are, where the trouble areas are. We can require additional training, counseling, discipline, suspension, whatever is warranted, but you can't do any of that without the database.
Okay, next question. Representative Brown, I know you sponsored House Bill 75 to help combat period poverty. So the question is, are you planning to reintroduce legislation on this issue in the next session?
Which bill is this?
House Bill 75?
I don't recall the number. So is this a bill that I co-sponsor? Whoever, I'm looking for the person, whoever asked the question, if they can expand on,
Lydia?
is this one that I co-sponsored? Okay, that is one that I am not co-sponsoring it. I mean, I am co-sponsoring it, but I am not sponsoring it. I believe that was sort of a part of the dignity package.
Is the period products in public schools?
Yes, that was one that I again, with the dignity, that was one that I co-sponsored. But the one that I will be re-sponsoring is dealing with the Crown Act, which kind of goes hand in hand with those particular bills. But yes, if it comes back to the legislature, I will be co-sponsoring that bill.
All right, thank you. Okay, Senator Bracy, please comment on getting your scholarship/reparations passed in the same session as the most restrictive voting restrictions law since Jim Crow. And there's a follow-up.
Jesus did it. I don't know really what to tell you. I mean, it's
Bill is something that's been worked on.
No, yeah, so I will say Representative Brown and I worked on a bill last year to make sure that the Ocoee massacre was taught in schools, and that was an uphill battle, and we got that done. So I would say that we had already laid the groundwork and built the momentum for what I believe is an unprecedented bill. When you talk about reparations, you saw the presidential candidates talking about supporting that reparations. And there's only been one time in the history of this country that a state legislature has paid reparations to black Americans. And this is the second time. And so this is historic, and I'm very proud. Not only that, they named it after me, my colleagues did, and so I'm so proud. This is something that will go on long after I'm, but.
To follow up that question, as a parent soon to send a child to college, $6,100 is $6,100. But in view of the land and generational wealth lost as a result of the immense atrocity, we actually say that $6,100 is enough. And if it is, and if it's not enough, can you put a dollar amount on what would be enough?
That's a great question. I don't think it's enough, and I've said that. I mean, when you talk about the land that was stolen, the generational trauma that was inflicted on the people that were affected, I don't think you can put a dollar amount on it. Even if you just look at the land that was stolen and calculate the amount that it would be worth today, upwards of, I think, $30 million, this doesn't come close. But considering the climate in the legislature, considering that this was, the word reparations was was a boogeyman word. The fact that we were even able to get something done, I think, is still a large accomplishment and something that needs to be applauded. I still think it needs to be more, but I think considering the circumstances, it's still something to be proud of.
And so, last follow-up question on this three-part question. Will you try to get more in the upcoming session?
I will, and I think what I will focus on, not necessarily increasing the amount, but increase the amount per student, but increasing the number of students that can be eligible. Right now, it's just for 50 students. I'm gonna try to push that to as many students as I can. And so, what is interesting about this, Rosewood, which happened in 1991 or 2 or whatever, that focused on strictly the descendants. This will allow for this money to go to descendants, but also African-American students in Ocoee. Once the descendants are taken care of, and I don't think there's gonna be many that will be able to take advantage of it, this will go to African-American students in Ocoee, that live in Ocoee. So, and if we can expand that, I think it will have such an impact on the city of Ocoee.
And I think anything we can do to help students get a higher education, we ought to do that, and there's some innovative ways to do that. I worked for more than 10 years to get a specialty license plate for the Divine Nine. And 85% of the proceeds from the sale of those plates will go to those organizations for scholarships. Not a single plate is going to be printed until we have sold 3,000. We're 2,000, we haven't sold 3,000, so we need to get on it. And I see Delta Sigma Theta, Sigma Gamma Rho, Alpha Kappa Alpha, Kappa Alpha Psi, you all are here. And we need to hit that 3,000 mark so that these organizations can begin to get the 85% of the sales to support scholarship.
Well, we certainly know all members of Divine Nine in this room have already applied for their specialty tag.
I hope so. I hope so.
I know
Well,
I have.
if you have not, it's going to be a little bit more restrictive. I amended a bill this year to limit the sale of those tags to members. If you have to show you're a member of the Divine Nine. You're either going to have to show a financial card or bring a letter from your national office showing that you were inducted. So you should have done it before we amended it. The groups want to make sure that just not any and everybody can buy a Divine Nine tag. So we were successful in getting that into a specialty license bill that really focused on our state parks. And so we need to sell about, I think it's 1,300 more, about 1,300 more tags to hit the 3,000 threshold.
Well, thank you for that work. And
You're
I
welcome.
Especially thank you for the amendment. This next question, does anyone expect new attacks on voting rights and limitations on the access to the ballot box in the upcoming session?
Yes, I think it's going to continue, particularly since we have the gubernatorial race in 2022, and the fewer people who show up, the more likely it is that the people who are in power stay in power. So it's designed to make it difficult. So I would anticipate we'll have further restrictions.
And let me just add, it remains to be seen whether or not it'll be in the form of legislation, because we also have to remember that we have redistricting coming up in a few months in the state. So that'll be what we need to pay attention to, and not necessarily, because what more can they do legislatively that they did not?
They'll figure out
The
something.
redistricting meetings are gonna kick off around September, right? End of September, beginning of October?
Probably October.
Okay, all right.
We just indicated our preferences for committees, and a decision will be made by Labor Day, and we'll know what committees we're going to be assigned to and what we're going to serve on. And a number of us have asked to be assigned to redistricting, but that's a decision that will be made by the Speaker's office.
Okay, next question. Does anyone expect new attacks on the Bright Futures scholarship for next session?
Sure, why not? I mean, it has several years, so anything goes in Tallahassee. They just find stuff to do, everything but the right thing to do in Tallahassee. So yes, I do expect it to be something that they look to manipulate. They didn't do it this year, which was a blessing, but it was the attack on the hospitals and, you know, other things, and I think it was just a distraction. But I'm sure they'll pick it back up next year.
And final question, and this is also a three-part. Was there any appropriations in this session for affordable/workforce housing?
Unfortunately, the Sadowski Fund in this last session was not protected, and 50% of it now will go for affordable housing, and the other 50% will go toward climate change and seawalls and things like that, that it was not intended for. One of my Republican colleagues said that 50% of something is better than 100% of nothing. So that's the way they look at it. But when the Sadowski Fund was created, it was created using some of the documentary stamps from real estate sales. And 100% was supposed to go for affordable housing. And over the years, it has been swept into general revenue and used for other purposes. And this year, the creative thing was to say, well, we won't take it all, we're just gonna take half of it.
Wow. And one thing I will say that's better than years past, we're now getting Republican support with this particular issue of not rating the Sadowski funds. It is something that, you know, we as constituents of the state have to continue to hone in. I know our local government folks that come up to Tallahassee definitely advocate for it, but there was a bill this year that we hope to hear and pass and get signed, but unfortunately it didn't. But it would, again, have them not rate it. They won't be able to rate it. It'll make it a requirement for them not to rate the.
And I'm sorry,
Sadowski funds.
I gotta say, this was not mentioned at all tonight, but it could have been more, definitely, because of the American Rescue Plan also we got from President Biden. And there are a lot of projects that were vetoed from the four people that sit on this panel that should have and could have been funded, because we went into session expecting to be in the negative, but because of the American Rescue dollars, our state's in the surplus. So we had money to put towards initiatives like that we care about, and it just didn't happen. So again, it goes back to leadership and the people that are in control. So elections, it all boils down to the elections and the consequences that they have. So
Can somebody take a stab, 20-second response to, are there still dollars available for rental assistance?
yes.
Yes. Okay, that was less than 20 seconds, thank you. So, thank you all for participating in this panel. Before we adjourn, I'd like to give each of you 1 minute exactly to kind of close out and tell us exactly what is your priority, what is your commitment to this next session?
Well, I'll start off and we can go that way. I'm still trying to figure that out. I do know I will be bringing back the Crown Act. It is a bill that myself and Senator Bracy have worked hard to get heard. They have common sense over in the Senate, but they don't in the House. And so that's the bill that I'll still be taking back. There'll probably be additional maternal health and health disparities legislation that I'll be filing again. But yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm going to reintroduce a bill to expand Medicaid. I represent the area where Disney is located, and saw so many people who lost their health insurance when they lost their job. And Medicaid would have provided a cushion or a safety net for so many people, so I'm going to reintroduce that, as well as trying to make sure that Florida lives up to a law that's been on the books for 27 years that requires instruction in African American history in all 67 counties. And my bill would withhold the salary of the school superintendent in any county that cannot document and demonstrate that the instruction is being provided.
Come on. Absolutely. Yeah, so I have dedicated a lot of my political career to fixing our criminal justice system. But I think, well, one, this will be my last session. I'm running for Congress to replace our Congresswoman Val Demings. And I would love to get the support of the people in this room, but that's not what you asked. So, but I'll be focusing on our transportation issues. I think that Central Florida has grown so much, and we really need to have a good plan for our transportation network. And so I'm going to pivot, I think, from the criminal justice space. I'll still do some of those bills, but I really want to focus in my last year on getting more funding for transportation needs. Links, buses, they don't have the routes that they need. And so I'm going to focus on trying to get more money for more buses right here in Central Florida. And then I'm going to also focus on the economy. I toured Mid-Florida Tech with Vicki Felder, our school board member, a couple weeks ago. And there are so many opportunities that are here for our kids and adults outside of going the college track. And so I think that we really need to bolster those programs to really prepare our students for the jobs of, you know, the next century, the next decades. And so that's what I'm going to be focusing on in the next session.
All right. I'll brief out a bill that I filed this past session that was a hearing in the House. But what basically it would do, it would create a pilot program for any of the 67 counties, for five school board districts from any of the 67 counties to apply to be one of 5 pilot districts to erect solar panels on public schools. Schools are not just used for instruction, they're used during natural disasters and shelters. So I think it would just be a cost benefit for the school board districts. So it'll be a pilot program, 67 school board districts to choose, any can apply. And I'll brief out that bill. What I'm most excited about going back to Tallahassee, it's not many things that excites me about going to Tallahassee, but I am excited. Senator Bracy and I, we actually outside here for the July and November, we had a press conference and said that we would go to Tallahassee this past session and file a bill to make Juneteenth a state paid holiday. We were not successful in Tallahassee, but we really feel that DC was watching us, and with that, now we have a federal holiday for Juneteenth. So historically, we see when the Martin Luther King holiday became a federal holiday, states were slow to implement it to make it a state paid holiday. So I'm going to go, and we're going to go and refile this bill in Tallahassee to make sure that although federal employees are compensated for this, their state employees will be looped in that as well. So.
Well, and let me just say, he did such a great job. I mean, he said it didn't pass, but this was something that was negotiated on the last couple days of session where we were right there, and basically he was in negotiations with me, leading those negotiations, but we didn't get everything we wanted, so we kind of left it on the table. But it was very close to passing, and he did such a great job in leading that effort. So I just wanted to highlight his work on that.
Well, I personally would like to thank each one of you for all of your hard work. All that you endured, each day, each one of those 60 days going there, understanding what you were up against.
Had to put on the whole armor.
Exactly, the whole armor.
Whole
But
armor.
not, not defaulting elsewhere, staying the course. So I appreciate you. I appreciate each one of you for taking the time out of your evening to come hear what our representatives have to say, and for listening to my wonderful voice. So thank you again. Hopefully this will not be the last legislative update that we convene in the city of Ocoee, but we appreciate the city of Ocoee for hosting us. So thank you again.